So, I wanted to start with a quote from a man who was famous for many different reasons. It reads, "There is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about." That was by Oscar Wilde, and I hope you'll understand the reason why I've included him in the talk the further I go on. So, my name's Ryan, and I wanted to talk to you about my job. It's a job I assume most of you, if not all of you, who have never considered doing before. That might be for a variety of reasons, possibly because you weren't aware of it, or maybe you were aware of it, and you dismissed it as being boring, pointless, or actually quite scary. Now, I wanted to use my time wisely today to debunk some myths, to explain to you how exciting and interesting my job actually is, and actually to advise you that it's really not as scary as some people may think, especially when comparing it to speaking in public without any notes. Now, before this job, finding a career seemed to involve an endless number of soul-destroying interviews, lying about where you see yourself in the next 5 years' time. That's when it all really changed for me. I stumbled across an advert. It was for a leadership program that was for people who, like the charity behind it, wanted to do their bit in order to change the world around them. I applied for it. I was successful, and before I knew it, I'd left that old life behind. So what do? Simply, I help some of the most vulnerable people in society. People who are homeless, people who have mental health issues, people who have never held a job down before, people who have drug addictions. It all sounds a bit grim, and it surely doesn't come out like the challenges. That's for sure. But that's just one side of the story. The other side is how well equipped I am with skills to help these people. For example, I help people read and write and support their education. But I'm definitely not a teacher. I couldn't deal with the paperwork. I couldn't do it. I help break up fights, and I've got the power to arrest if I need to. But I'm not a police constable. I can and I have saved people's lives, as I'm a first responder, but I'm not a paramedic. And I'm here to help, provide support, guidance, and a sympathetic ear. But neither am I a social worker. So who am I? Well, I'm actually a prison officer, and I'm really proud to say that I am. Now, those might not be the sorts of activities you'd expect a prison officer to engage in. And I probably don't fit the stereotype of what a prison officer should act and look like. And if that's the case, I sympathise with you entirely, because 12 months ago I believed the same. Prison officers are stupid, they're corrupt, they're bullies. Those are the sorts of stereotypes I was aware of. That was until I found out more about who and what a prison officer is. Maybe if it wasn't for the charity I work with, or not graduates, I would never have had the chance to meet a prison officer. And that being the case, I would have never challenged those stereotypes in my mind. I would have had them forever. Now, stereotypes in this format, we don't choose to believe in them. They're ones that are kind of forced upon us without us even thinking, and they stick with us. So, if you never meet a prison officer, where would your idea of them come from? I know, the media, where we're portrayed as, at best, glorified bouncers, and at worst, well, like I said before, stupid, corrupt bullies. Now, that doesn't seem to bother me too much, because I know on one hand, I'm none of those things, although I could probably find a strong group of people with a lot of evidence that would argue about me being stupid. And on the other hand, it's because there's something so much more inherently dangerous than being any of those things. And that's being invisible. To go back to the quote at the start of my talk about a man who'd had his own experiences of being inside prison, there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about at all. Take the NHS, for example. Over the Christmas period, they were in disarray. It was a shambles. But the key difference was that at the heart of every discussion and debate were the medical staff themselves. Now, what I assume you gathered from the media was that these people are a group of hard-working individuals that go above and beyond the call of duty and made the best out of a really crappy situation. And they were held up as heroes, and rightfully so. They deserve it. Alongside other public sector workers too. Teachers, police, firefighters, nurses. They're all recognised for doing their part in the community. But prison officers just aren't included in that. Now, that's what surprises me the most, because I can't think of anything more unique and exciting than doing this job. Where the reality is that every day I meet new people, I face new challenges, and I learn new stories. But it's not just surprising, it's actually quite damaging, knowing that due to those stereotypes, none of you would ever consider doing this job, even though it's essential, especially when it comes to rehabilitation. Now, did you know that over half the people that leave prison within a 12-month period wind up back in prison? Now, that's people who haven't managed to turn their lives around. And let's not forget, that's victims affected by these people as well. And as a society, we're left to pick up the pieces of that, which presents us with a huge challenge. But if you want to flip it on its head, maybe it's an even bigger opportunity to turn things around. So I wanted to tell you 3 stories now of my successes and challenges that I've faced so far inside the prison service. And I'll start with education. So if you struggle to read and write, you're going to struggle full stop. And yes, I did include that as a pun. Thank you very much. Did you know that just under half of the prison population at the moment were either suspended or permanently excluded from school? Just over half the prison population at the moment have a literacy level that of an 11-year-old. You may think I'm brave for being a prison officer, but real bravery is admitting defeat and asking for help, reading a letter from your own child. Now, there's a real hunger to learn inside of prisons, and of course there is. It's a welcome escapism. It's a distraction. It gives you self-worth. And that's not even to mention the practical qualifications that you gain from doing it too. There was a guy that I've worked really closely with, and because of the maths and English courses that he was taking inside the prison, he was a completely different person to one that walked through the gates. I felt honoured to join into his lessons, to see how he was getting on. At the start, I used to help him with his word puzzles. I stopped doing that because he'd always beat me. Not that I'm bitter about it. But I used to, at the start of his whole journey, I used to help him with his legal papers too. And again, he stopped asking me for help because he was progressing so well in his courses that he was processing literature much better without any of our help. Now, I said my goodbyes to him early on this year for his release. I'm going to park that story and come back to it in a few minutes because I've got more to say on that. But education is an obviously uplifting task. But not everything inside the prison service is so immediately positive. Which brings me on to my next point, mental health. And over the past few years, we've become really good at talking about mental health and recognising that it's more common than you may think. Now, a lot more needs to be done still. But as officers, we've become much more aware of how we can identify and treat these issues. So, I was 2 weeks into the job, and I encountered my first self-harm. I thought back to my training. I kept calm, I kept him calm, I spoke to him, and we waited until the nurse was available to administer his medication. Now, this was a guy that was clearly struggling. He'd often go days on end without sleeping. Over the months I worked with him, we tried to find different coping mechanisms and different ways for him to channel his emotions. And things started to slowly look up for him. A few months ago, he left. And it was only until recently I found out how much of an impact that I'd actually had on his well-being inside prison. Through one of his friends who's still inside, he passed on a message to him, and he relayed that to me. It said, "I'm back home now with my wife and kids, safe, but if it wasn't for your commitment inside, things might have ended very differently," which is beautiful. It's a really nice bit of feedback, and it would have been even more beautiful if he'd used my real name rather than called me the short officer. But whatever, a compliment is a compliment, and I'll take what I can get, because we don't expect to ever hear from our success stories ever again. It's a really bittersweet pill to swallow. And sadly, that brings me back to my first topic, about the gentleman who tried to turn his life around through education. Unfortunately, he came back inside within 2 weeks. He was missing that one last piece of the puzzle to turn it all around for him. Without the prospect of employment or housing, what choice did he have apart from to go back to his old lifestyle of petty crime? Because the point that I'm trying to make here is that these challenges don't end once people walk out the prison gates. It's actually where the challenge begins, which my next topic is employment. Now, there's still a huge stigma around employing ex-offenders, and only 24%, it's estimated at, leave for purposeful employment. Now, if you don't have that, the chances of you becoming homeless or going back into the prison system is greatly increased. And it's estimated at about 15 billion the cost of reoffending is per year, which is insane. That's an insane amount of money. So that's why, alongside of my day job, I've been doing all that I can at the moment to find out more about how we start to try and fix that problem. Now, there's loads of companies out there that do a fantastic job of trying to find work for ex-offenders. And one company that I've been working with very closely is called Tempus Novo. They were set up by two burly Yorkshiremen who have the same beliefs as me. They've got 60 years as officers being under their belt, and they believe that, like myself, we're not going to reduce reoffending rates unless we increase employment rates for ex-offenders. Now, these guys, over the last 3 years, they've gotten way over 100 ex-offenders into purposeful, stable employment, which is fantastic. But again, that's only one side of the coin, because the other side is the employers themselves and the attitudes that they have to change in order to make everything work. Take Timpson's, for example. They actively seek to employ ex-offenders. They know full well that they make fantastic employees, that they're less likely to quit their job, less likely to have a sick day, and when compared to your average employee, have an increased working output and put a lot more effort in. And if there's one thing that you're going to take from my talk today, please let it be this. If Timpson's can make locksmiths and key cutters out of ex-burglars, and ex-thieves, then what is everybody else's excuse? If they can change the mindset of, well, it's such a vulnerable situation, and they can change the mindset of ex-prisoners, then what is everybody else's excuse? We have to work together on this. And I'm not saying I have the answer to that last bit, but in the meantime, I'm looking into setting up my own social enterprise to help ex-offenders get into employment. And at the moment, it's not really much. It's just a few ideas that I've mashed together, things that I've seen that really work, and things that maybe need a bit of tweaking that I've seen out there that could work and has the potential. Now, this sector should be a collaborative. Everybody should be working together, because lone rangers don't get very far. They might do their bit, but they could be doing a lot more. So if anybody's got any fantastic ideas who want to fire in my way, I'm all ears, because I'd really like to help work and get this off the ground. And again, it might not be something that you'd expect from a prison officer, but I think we're the best people for it. We've got access to this fantastic pool of people. And I think we're the best people to make these connections between employers and employees too. Now, those were 3 examples of my life, and sometimes it can just be a snippet of my day as well, because there's loads going on. And hopefully I've given you a different perspective on who and what a prisoner is, and who and what a prison officer is too. Because I know a lot of you out there, like me, want a job where you're helping people. And by working in the prison system, you'll be helping some of the most vulnerable and challenging in society. And as for me, well, like before, going for job interviews, that one question I used to hate was, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? So boring. It's absolutely pointless. It's a horrible question. But at least now I can be honest about it and say, I don't know. Maybe I'll still be in the prison system. Maybe I'll be helping ex-offenders get into employment. But one thing I do know is that in whatever capacity, whatever format, and whatever job, I'll be dedicated to helping those who still need it most. Because I want to live in a society where we see prisoners as people rather than criminals, and a society that looks towards the potential in their future rather than the mistakes in their past. Now, I started with a quote from a prisoner, so I think it's only right that I end with one too. Nelson Mandela once said, "No one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails." And a nation should not be judged on how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones. Thank you all for listening.